So, the day before he entered Jerusalem for the last time, Jesus stopped in to see his friends, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Their home in Bethany lay kind of in the suburbs, up in the heights near Jerusalem. And according to John, Jesus may have visited the home of these two sisters and one brother many times. They acted as kind of an extended family for him. They call him Lord, but with him he can be very much just a man. And perhaps there have been many memorable dinners full of good food and good humor. Well, days before this dinner, in this morning's text, he performs a capital M miracle, raising Lazarus from the dead, and Jesus weeps, we're told, having heard of his friend's death. That's Jesus, very much the human man. According to this gospel, the miracle has put Jesus at the top of the religious right's most wanted list. Jesus' days are numbered, and he knows it, and maybe these dear friends pick up on it when he arrives for dinner. Perhaps they see it on his face. In any case, they take Jesus in, they shut him away from the world for the night. It's a safe place. They make a wonderful supper for him, as I say. It's kind of perfect for us to have the smell of our brunch wafting in at this moment. Martha is in charge of the supper, of course. Everyone is fetching or chopping things except Lazarus, who's maybe not the man he was before the tomb incident. We don't know. And so in the midst of this, Mary slips away. She's off looking for something in her room. She comes back quietly, ever so slightly secretive. Everyone sits down to supper around low tables. The disciples are unable to not look at Lazarus, raised from the dead. It's not something you see every day. He sits there, perhaps unaware that he and his rising from the dead may be the reason that things are rising to crisis for Jesus with the religious authorities. The sense in John's gospel is that Jesus has, in fact, traded his life for his friend's life, unless he can find a way to escape the net that is drawing tighter and tighter around him. After supper, Mary produces the thing she fetched earlier, an expensive jar full of something called spikenard, brought by traders along the Silk Road all the way from Afghanistan. She breaks the jar's neck as Martha had broken the bird killed for supper. And just as the smell of the bird had filled the house, now that smell is overwhelmed by the smell of this costly perfume. One interpreter says it's something, this spikenard is something smelling between the smells of mint and ginseng. Then Mary does 4 remarkable things in a row. First, she loosens her hair in a room where there are men, which a respectable, in quotes, woman would never do. Then she pours the balm on the feet of Jesus, which also is not done, maybe on the head, but not on the feet. The intimacy of the event more than doubles when she touches his feet with her hands. And finally, the coup de grace, she wipes his feet with strands of her flint black hair. So here we have love and death bound together forever in one picture. The whole thing leaves everyone speechless. As the narrative comes to us from John, it is an absolute jewel among the stories in the New Testament. And it's easy to get this account of the anointment mixed up with the different versions of the story in the other 3 Gospels. In Matthew and Mark, the woman is unnamed. She is merely a woman who interrupts a dinner at Simon the leper's house. She pours nard on Jesus' head there in front of everyone. In Luke's account, she's a woman of questionable reputation who washes his feet with her tears and covers them with kisses before rubbing them with myrrh. Only in this account, in John's gospel, does she really have a name. She is not a stranger. She is not a sinner. She is Jesus' longtime friend, and she loves Jesus, and he loves her. And the whole thing seems to be just a little bit over the top. And Judas, among the disciples, is scandalized and speaks up. Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor? Now, maybe Judas's motives are shoddy and he wants the money for himself, as the author of this gospel says, but look, he does make a point. A day laborer and family could live for a year on this amount of money it would cost to buy this ointment. Leave her alone, says Jesus. She has this ointment so as to anoint me for my burial. You will always have the poor with you, and you can do right by them whenever you want. But you will not always have me. That is one of the most moving and remarkable things he ever says. In fact, anybody ever says. It's just beautiful. In the same way that he and so much of what he does is just beautiful. And you know, there is a time for everything. Judas has very little sense of the times or seasons and what they call for. So here's my point. Sure, it's better to give than receive, but we all need to know how to receive as well as to give. Part of the gorgeous genius of Jesus is he gets this totally. And you know, for a lot of people, receiving is a very hard thing. People get mixed up about gifts, and in 1,000 different ways, some people just can't accept a thing. I adore the following extract from Marilyn Robinson's novel, Gilead. I suspect a number of you have read it. With a degree of impatience, the protagonist in the novel describes his grandfather, who was always losing or giving things away. Here's how he puts it. He says, I have a certain acquaintance with a kind of holy poverty. My grandfather never kept anything that was worth giving away or let us keep it either, so my mother said. He would take laundry right off the line and give it away. She said he was worse than a thief, worse than a house fire. She said she could probably go to any town in the Middle West and see some pair of pants she'd patched walking by on the street. I believe he was a saint of some kind. When someone remarked in his hearing that he had lost an eye in the Civil War, he said, I prefer to remember that I have kept one. My mother said it was good to know there was anything he could keep. He told me once he was wounded in Wilson's Creek on the day of the death of General Lyon. Now that, he said, was a loss. When he left us, we all felt his absence bitterly. But he did make things difficult. It was an innocence in him. He lacked patience for anything but the plainest interpretation of the starkest commandments. To him who asks, give in particular. Well, that's a problem with a lot of people. They are so literal-minded as to be of no earthly good. But then, good news, there are those rare individuals who conversely understand the unconventional, counterintuitive genius of Jesus. Dorothy Day, for instance, I hope you know about her. If you don't, Google her and read everything you can. When Dorothy, had been a novelist and writer of memoir, was working at the Catholic Worker Soup Kitchen in New York City decades and decades ago. One day, someone came in and donated a diamond ring, gave it right to Dorothy, and all the staff. I mean, she was a lone ranger. She ran the whole thing. There was no board telling her what to do. Anyway, all the staff and volunteers wondered what Dorothy was going to do with this diamond ring. Like Judas and the spikenard, they each calculated how much it might be worth, and then what could be bought with it for the soup kitchen. Dorothy thought about that diamond ring all morning, and then in one wild gesture, she gave it to a woman who had been taking a meal a day at the soup kitchen for years. Well, Dorothy's staff became unglued. "We could have bought enough rice and beans and bread to feed the people here for a month," one of them said with great indignation. And in response, Dorothy said one little thing. "Do you suppose that God only made diamonds for the rich?" I doubt that Mary had much of an idea what she was doing with that ointment. She was following what she knew in her heart was absolutely right, what the moment cried out for. Jesus, with his impeccable judgment, knew too that it was a holy act, a gift a woman gives a man maybe once in a lifetime. It was something of God. And those who stand around watching either write them off as a crazy or fall silent before something they don't understand, right? Maybe the confused ones do sense that it is an act of courage that rings with holiness. I don't know. Barbara Brown Taylor has said that when Mary stood before Jesus with that pound of pure spikenard, it could have gone either way. She says Mary could have anointed his head and everyone could have proclaimed him king, but she didn't do that. When she approached him, she dropped to her knees, poured the balm on his feet as if anointing him a dead man. And to any who would object, Jesus' words were simply, "Let her alone." There will be nothing prudent or economical about this man's life. Barbara Brown Taylor says that in Jesus, the extravagance of God is made flesh. In him, the excessiveness of God's mercy is made manifest. Well, last week I preached on the famous prodigal son text, and Jesus himself could be deemed prodigal, meaning literally wasteful. It's a word between wasteful and extravagant, right? Wasteful in a most wonderful way. The flask will not be held back like some bottle of expensive, rare vintage wine from the days of Napoleon, which might have been, bought as an investment. That's not what this is about. No, it will be opened, offered up, the jar broken so it can't be used again, everything poured out completely, emptied to the last drop. That is the way with the most precious things of God. But life will come from it. Life will spin out of it, and it will be beautiful, just as life will spin out of Jesus' deliberate death on the cross, right? Of his giving up of his life, breaking of that jar. Jesus, in this gospel, says, "No one takes it from me. I give it up of my own accord." So his actions are 100% deliberate. And the supreme fact about our lives is this, that no life is rich unless it's poured out. The key, of course, is finding something worth pouring your whole life out for, right? I love that thing we read just before we sang. The thing that Viktor Frankl said, that Diane read to us. Viktor Frankl, survivor of the Holocaust, who had seen horrors that none of us can imagine. He said, "Live as if you were living a second life, and as though you had squandered the first." Live as if you were living a second life, and as if you had squandered your first one. That's how Mary was living in the gospel story this morning. That's probably why she made the grand gesture she made with the jar of nard. A few of you will remember the marvelous little film, The Straight Story, with Richard Farnsworth, the preposterous story of the aged disabled man who has to surrender his car and driver's license at a very old age and who travels through 2 states on his riding lawnmower in order to apologize to his long estranged brother, something he just has to do in order to die a peaceful death. In fact, he's doing it so that his brother can die a peaceful death too. You know, it wasn't everyone's favorite movie. The film moved at the pace of a riding lawnmower, frankly. People would line up around the block to get tickets to the latest Batman movie, would sleep through it. The whole premise seemed preposterous, unless you watch long enough to see all the credits and learn that it's based on the real life of a man whose name actually was Alvin Straight. All that way on a lawnmower, just to say you're sorry? Why couldn't he have just phoned home like E.T.? But then why couldn't the woman with the expensive jar of spikenard just say to Jesus she was sorry he was going to be dead soon? You get the difference? Explaining her action, Jesus says, "She has done a beautiful thing for me. Something beautiful. So beautiful it will be remembered for as long as humans have memory." The philosopher Francis Bacon is remembered to have said something to the effect that in all beauty there is some strangeness of proportion. Think of it, something out of sync, like eyes so large and so dark they don't quite fit the face they're set in, or a neck so long and slender it somehow seems wrong except for being so incredibly lovely. The disciples would certainly argue that what they were suggesting about selling the nard and giving the money to the poor, they were suggesting out of love. Love for humanity. Capital H, humanity. But for Jesus, what they thought of as love wasn't love exactly. I mean, if it was love, it was a calculating kind of love. In what's called the Bible's love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13, the Apostle Paul tells us about people who make grand gestures, giving away all they have for narcissistic reasons. He also mentions people who give their bodies to be burned as martyrs, but who aren't motivated by love. He sees through them. They do what they do to attract attention or gain what they think is an eternal reward, or to make martyrs of themselves so they can have their names on a plaque somewhere. But not for love. Not like this woman whose cup simply overflows. Her beautiful, loving gesture is the Christian answer, to all the right-wing fundamentalist martyrs of the last several decades. The ultimate religious sacrifice is not to become a suicide bomber. That is a counterfeit. And Will Smith was right when at the Oscars he said that love makes you do crazy things. But his compulsive violence was, sad to say, a counterfeit too. It's good to see from his resignation on Friday from the Academy that he's beginning to get that. He's beginning to understand that too. Mary's love seems to the disciples to be just so much foolishness in the face of a starving world. They just don't get it. They have no way of knowing the timeliness of this woman's extravagant gift. She gives all she has, just as Jesus is on his way to give all he has, all he is, choosing once and for all to not return evil for evil, to show us that it is indeed possible to live that way. You know, we all live, 80 years on this planet, maybe a few more or less. What does it mean to have lived a full life? It means knowing who you are. It means knowing the times and the seasons, and in that knowing that certain moments in our lives come along and call for extraordinary measures. It means asking yourself important questions like, are diamonds only for the rich? It means further wondering, maybe even out loud, whether there is more to life than making money. It means being there for another human being as Mary was there for Jesus when he needed someone to not run away, when she saw a loneliness in his eyes like maybe no one ever showed another person before. And if you have trouble grasping all of that, remember, the key may be this. Try, if you will. Try living as if you were living a second life, and as if you had squandered your first go-round.